Hello there, I'm Amy,
And I'm Matty.
and this is the very first episode of Ghosts, Creatures and Scares Oh My, a podcast where we share our love of the show Supernatural and dive into the fascinating and terrifying real life legends behind the ghosts and creatures featured in each episode of Supernatural.
This episode is called Woman in White, and we explore the origins and real accounts of this phenomenon.
So, we're a husband and wife team, and we're absolute brand new novices to the world of podcasting. We do love podcasts, though, don't we?
We do indeed, yeah.
Yeah, we are both massive fans, and we both got quite heavily into podcasts more so over the lockdown period, which I think a lot of people did, didn't they, when they're kind of stuck in the house and didn't have much to do. And we have got a little 5-month-old daughter who is beautiful, and that helped me during night feeds, I think, just listening to the podcast. And it was just something, to keep my mind active, keep me awake. And we've got a little doggy called Milo. Um, so we're quite diverse in the podcast we listen to. So I tend to gravitate back towards I like comedy ones. You like sports and comedy, and I go back towards true crime, but especially supernatural ones. We both really gravitate towards ghost and supernatural ones, and we just thought, could we give this a go ourselves? If you are listening to this, you probably already listened to some really well established ghost and supernatural podcasts, and they are brilliant. And we thought we'd give it a go, see if people like it. So funnily enough, though, even though I'm saying I gravitate towards ghosts and all that kind of thing, I'm actually quite a skeptical person. Well, what about
I'm a
you?
bit more optimistic about it.
Yeah.
I do think I'm a lot more open-minded.
Yeah, you are quite more you're more open-minded than me, I think. I think I'm very skeptical, and I've got that kind of, I don't know, science hat on maybe that I'd have to be able to prove it. I think I'm the kind of person where I'm dying to see something, because then as terrifying as that would be, and I might regret this later, it would prove that there is something after life. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it, really. It'd be great to know that there was something. I think I'm more interested in the folklore and the legends behind it, and that's why we thought we'd give this podcast a go, really. And we thought we'd link it to the show Supernatural and talk about the ghosts, entities, and creatures that are featured on that show. Because if you are a fan, you'll know there's some amazing legends and entities on that show. You introduced me to the show Supernatural. Why do you love it so much?
What's not to love about Supernatural? I just think everything about it's perfect. The characters, my love for Sam, Dean, and John, and yeah, the rest. Bobby, Crowley, Cass. I think the show's just it's been spot on with the casting, the stories and legends, and all of the details that they put into it. They go into depth with every single episode, and yeah, I find it a very easy show to watch. Something that I can watch on repeat, as I'll watch on repeat all the time.
I think Supernatural's your comfort show.
It is 100%.
Definitely you can just sit and watch it. I mean, to be honest, sometimes we really have different tastes for shows and films, but this one is, as soon as I watched it, I was like, this is definitely up my street. And I think it would be fair to say you do have a massive romance for Dean Winchester, the older brother in the show.
Yeah, Sam and Dean,
Yeah.
the class
But
of
I think Dean especially
Dean especially,
is
Soldier Boy
cool.
and the boys.
Yeah, so the older brother, Dean Winchester, is played by Jensen Ackles, and he, like you've just said, he's in the recent series of The Boys. He plays Soldier Boy.
Hmm.
But he was also, I think, in one of those long-running soap operas in America, and he gives me a Joey Tribbiani vibe, like good-looking, funny, a bit cheesy. And then what really confuses me though is Sam Winchester, his younger brother in the show. He's played by, I'm going to try this name, Jared Padalecki, who is Dean in Gilmore Girls. Now, Gilmore Girls is my comfort show, so the fact that I've got to call him Sam and not Dean is just going to get really confusing. So please keep me right if I start mixing the names up. But we love shows like this, don't we? I think Grimm's another one where there's a big overarching story throughout the seasons, but every episode actually is an individual new creature that they have to dive into the folklore and the legend behind it. And that's why we wanted to give this a go. So, for anyone who doesn't know, the show Supernatural launched in 2005, starring Jared Padalecki and Jensen Ackles as Sam and Dean Winchester, brothers who hunt various monsters and entities to the soundtrack of 70s dad rock as they drive through the heartland of America in a pretty amazing 1967 Chevrolet Impala. As I'm reading this, I'm zoning in on 70s dad rock. That's probably granddad rock, isn't it? It is, isn't it? Granddad. I think dad rock now is like Blink 182 and Fall Out Boy, which is really terrifying. Yeah, so each week we're going to work our way through each episode from season one, but don't worry, we're not going to dissect the show, because if you're a fan of Supernatural, you'll know exactly what happens in each episode. And if you're not, please go and watch it. You don't need me to talk you through it. And we're just going to really pick the creature that they have to defeat and fight against, and go through the history, the folklore, and some pretty terrifying real life stories linked to that creature. So, Matty, could you tell us a bit about episode 1 of Supernatural?
So, episode one is the pilot of the show and features the woman in white legend. We're introduced to brothers Sam and Dean, who haven't spoken for a while. Dean visits Sam at college and tries to persuade him to join in the hunt for whatever is behind the series of disappearing young men on a remote stretch of road in the town of Jericho. We find out that the woman in white spirit is haunting the roadside and talking to young men. Late at night, when they're driving alone, she appears as a beautiful woman and asking for the men to take her home. When it's clear that these men are attracted to her and willing to cheat on their partners, the spirit attacks and kills them. Sam and Dean's investigations uncover the story of a local woman, Constance Welch, who drowned her two children in the bath before killing herself after experiencing temporary insanity caused by discovering that her husband was being unfaithful. She becomes a woman in white spirit and preys upon unfaithful men in revenge.
So this was one of the strongest pilots I've seen in a show. It just was straight away. I was like, I don't need to get through episode 1, 2, and 3 to get into it. I was hooked as soon as I saw that.
100%. It gives you, I think, it builds up sort of a good a background story straight away, telling you a little bit about the brothers, and then you
Yeah.
know like what's happening, and then you have the beginning of the show, which shows you what happened with why the dad's so obsessed with finding whatever killed his wife, and then it just goes straight into a legend, which I just think was just a brilliant pilot, isn't it?
It is in the Woman in White legend. It does actually appear across lots of different cultures with many differing aspects of the tale. The one thing though that these stories tend to have in common is the phantom, the spirit, is usually a young woman or a girl wearing some sort of white garment. Now this could be a sleeping gown, one of those old-fashioned kind of nightgowns that they used to wear, or commonly a wedding dress. And this woman or girl tends to have been killed violently or has committed suicide. Now, I just want to put this in now that the if you know the legend of the woman in white, La Llorona, and if you've seen the episode of Supernatural, just a little trigger warning that it does mention suicide quite a lot. So I just wanted to let you know if that's something that's going to be make you want to turn off, that's absolutely fine. Um, so the theme of loss is really evident in this legend across all different ones that I've come across when I've been doing a little bit of research. This could be the loss of a child, could be the betrayal of a lover, it could be unrequited love that so the spirit's doomed to mope around and seek out revenge, or just kind of some of the spirits are quite like Mona Myrtles, they just kind of hover around, repeating the same sad end of the life, which is probably even sadder, really. Anyway, so one of the earliest references to a woman in white spirit comes from medieval England, and apparently, according to legend, if a family member or someone in your household is about to die, you will see an apparition of a woman in white to warn them about the impending death, which is kind of like in other cultures, you get the banshee in Irish folklore, I believe, where you'll hear a wailing woman, and that's letting you know that something is going to happen. And I think it's is it crows in some cultures. I'm
Yeah,
making is it? Am I making that? Is that Nordic culture maybe? Am I just getting mixed up with
I think you're getting mixed up
Odin?
a bit there. Yeah.
I've watched it. Yeah, Vikings is another one of my comfort shows. I probably watched too much Vikings, but anyway, I
Well, that's not
think
crows, that's ravens,
is that
isn't it?
Ravens. Well, no, I think it's crows. I think
Got to take a look at that.
someone will tell us if I'm wrong. I could be absolutely wrong there, but it's a black bird. We'll just say. So yeah, I think that'd be quite terrifying I think I'd be if I was medieval England, I'd be avoiding everyone wearing white. You know what I mean, wearing those long white flowing gowns.
Yeah, yeah. Gotta stay away from anybody in the full white dress.
I know it's funny, isn't it? Because they always seem to be wearing these old-fashioned gowns.
Yeah, it. I mean, as the open-minded one, I do have to say that it's very weird that they're always wearing the exact same white dress, and that it's never some white trackies or something else that that they could have died in, rolling with the times and all that.
I would be shocked, Matty, if a medieval ghost were wearing a white trackie. But you're right, we have been wearing modern clothes and jeans for long enough now that you think there'd be some ghosts knocking around in tracksuits and jeans. Although if it was me and I kind of passed away, touch wood, in my nightgown, it would be mismatched 2019 Christmas pajamas from Primark or a ripped MCR top, which wouldn't quite have the same effect. But maybe to counterbalance that, in those times, maybe they didn't have the dye to dye the clothes, so a lot of the clothes would have been white or beige. I'm not sure. And also, what do you think about this one? Do you think that what is believable? Is that just maybe like because they were very religious people, very supernatural, they were more open-minded to that kind of thing? Or do you believe this?
I just think they were very, especially in medieval times, any little thing was considered gospel, and
Mm.
like I imagine it's probably just there to scare people more so than it being real.
Yeah, they didn't have the internet, obviously, so they wouldn't have had been able to disprove these things. Such and such from the next village has seen a woman in white, and then, her husband's died. That would have been, like you say, gospel to them. They would have been more likely to believe. But to be devil's advocate to that one, do you not think, in medieval times, the chances of someone in your house dying are going to be much higher than they are now? They would have had cross generations in the house. Then you had low infant mortality. You had things like plague, famine. The chances of them dying would have been a lot higher. So I don't know about that
The
one.
average death
Yeah.
age of death was a lot
Mhm.
lower as well, wasn't it? So I mean, it just shows you what. I mean, it could be countless things that killed them back then. So
Yeah, exactly. But I just thought it was interesting to start off there because it is one of the earliest references to our Woman in White legend, which will take us through the episode. Going now to sticking with, sorry, England, also Irish, Scottish, and Welsh legends of the women in white story. They tend to centre around women and girls who were of significant social standing and wealth. They were different to the La Llorona, which we'll come to later, which could just be an everyday woman. These were quite rich, wealthy women. And it tends to be that they were murdered by their husbands or they actually killed themselves because they'd been forced to marry someone they didn't love by a family member. That could be by the father, or if they were killed by the husbands, it might be because they weren't they were believed to be adulterous. So it's a violent end, definitely a violent end. But these ghosts, unlike some of the other legends that we're going to read a bit later on, they're more melancholic. They're not vengeful spirits that are out to hurt other people. They just haunt the spots where they died, and occasionally they do appear to the living. Usually they I'll try that again, frequent castles and grand houses, and they show themselves to unsuspecting tourists. But like I've just said, they don't seem to wish us any harm. They seem to be trapped in a loop of the sad death. One place that does fascinate me is Hampton Court. Now, you know me, how obsessed am I with history, castles, kings and queens and stuff.
every time I come into the sitting room, you're sitting watching a different documentary on it.
Yeah, a bit of a Mark Corrigan. If anyone gets a peep show reference, I am. I do absolutely love history. It is, I'll sit and watch as well as Supernatural. Well, you don't. I'll sit and watch things like Tudors and Catherine of Aragon and all that stuff. And Henry VIII, I really am fascinated. I don't know why, because he was an absolute tyrant, but there's something about that history, that period of history that just really draws me in. So somewhere that I've never been and I would absolutely love to go is Hampton Court Palace, where Henry VIII did spend a lot of his time. And we're going to be looking at wives number 3 and 5 today. So Jane Seymour and Catherine Howard. So these women, the ghosts of these women are said to haunt Hampton Court, and sometimes the staff members and tourists have actually seen these apparitions. Jane Seymour was rumoured to be his favourite wife, wasn't she? She's the one, I believe. Again, I'll check this one. This is the one who he's buried next to. And I think, was she really his favourite wife because he loved her, or I don't think he was that way inclined, or was it just because she gave him the son that he always wanted?
I think we'll both know the answer to that one.
Yeah, he was very obsessed with having sons, and she died in really tragic circumstances. Maybe you could argue she didn't live long enough for him to get sick of her. Um, she died shortly after giving birth to his only son, Edward, oh, only legitimate son, I should say, Edward. And she roams the grounds in a quiet state of mourning wearing her white bedclothes. That is quite horrifying, isn't it?
Yeah, imagine walking through there on a dark night and seeing that. You turn and just run.
Yeah. And I've just, this is my little sad story. I have quite recently given birth, so I can, it was traumatic, wasn't it? The way I did, I was absolutely fine. The baby was absolutely fine, but I can only imagine the horror of giving birth in those times because no, you had no pain relief, no real medical care. And I think with Jane Seymour, I could be wrong again, but it was something like sepsis set in, and she didn't die in childbirth, but it was shortly after. It was really sad. The other one is Catherine Howard, so that's wife number 5. Now, this was a period in Henry's life where he was old, he was really obese by this point. He had a really bad, painful leg, and he had had an injury in his youth, jousting, I think it was, where he had a really bad head injury. They say though, don't they, that these head injuries sometimes they can happen in people, and the personality totally changes.
Yeah, there's a bit of a switch, but at the same time, he was just always pretty bad man, wasn't he?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, we can't say, but is it not because he was so entitled with power? But I think the thing with him is it definitely made. Look, I can't say definitely, but I personally believe that was a major shift in his personality when that happened, because he did nearly die, and after that, his tempers apparently became much more ferocious, and it was shortly after that that the decline of Anne Boleyn happened. So anyway, Catherine Howard was really young. She was 19, and beautiful young woman compared to this tyrant old Asian fat king. Sounds awful saying that, but you know what I mean. And she was accused of adultery. Now, apparently, when the guards came to arrest Catherine Howard, she tried to escape, and she did actually manage to escape the clutches. Before they took her to the tower, she ran down the corridor to try and get to Henry to plead for her life. But he actually wasn't where he was meant to be. And by a twist of fate, he was actually praying in the chapel, so she never reached him. So she was later beheaded. We do know that, and apparently, her ghost is doomed to repeat that frantic dash down the corridor to try and reach Henry, and she never gets there. And people have actually seen that happen. I think that there's something really, really sad about. I mean, as sad as the childbirth, and that is horrific, but there's something really sad about a young girl being killed and just trying to get to him and having to repeat that again and again. You
Yeah, I'll
know,
definitely be staying well clear of that in case I ever see us running down the hall screaming.
Yeah. That's speaking of castles, and sorry, that's just popped in my head there. I've never been to Hampton Court Palace. I would absolutely love to do that. But we did go to Chiltern Castle. Now, if you're listening and you're into ghosts, which if you're listening, you probably are, you might know that the northeast where we live, you might have guessed that from the accents, is home to one of the most haunted castles in the world, and that is Chiltern Castle. Do you want to tell us a bit about our stay at Chiltern Castle?
Oh, if you're scared of spiders like Amy is, then I would definitely recommend you staying well clear because you'll probably run into, if you like Harry Potter, Aragog and all of our children like we did. Just remember sitting, watching, waiting to go on a ghost tour and seeing well, can be described as a gigantic spider right through a
Literally.
glass door, scuttling around. Yeah, it's
I was just going to be really clever there and try and make a Lord of the Rings reference, but I don't know what the spider's called.
Sheila
I was going to call it Sheila. No, Sheila the spider. Yeah, Shelob. Yeah, so Shelob or Aragog.
Aragog from Harry Potter. Yeah,
Yeah, what's the guy from Lord of the Rings called? Aragon.
Aragon.
Confusing. Yeah, was it, we went there, we stayed for 2 nights, and we're just thinking it's going to be the most terrifying. We're bound, if ever you're going to see a ghost, it's going to be here. It's apparently haunted by this creepy man, John the Ghost, who was really violent in his
John the
past.
Ghost.
John the that's what he was known in life, known John the Ghost. It's always, I don't know the surname, sorry, but he was really violent, especially towards women. So apparently, when you go in there, you can tug on the hair of women and stuff that that he finds attractive. So I never had my hair pulled, and I was just really offended. It's like when you walk past a building site, you don't get wolf whistled. Sorry, I'm ugly. So yeah. Anyway, we had no kind of incidents, but we did stay in the little chalet behind it, which I thought was going to be really luxurious. I feel awful saying this because the staff at Chiltern Castle, they were so kind, and when we complained about the spider, I was just saying I physically can't stay in this room because I do have really bad phobia of spiders, and I wasn't being ridiculous. They were huge,
There's
ginormous.
about 30 of them.
There was just loads of them, and even Matty was terrified. They just looked at us like we were absolute townies. Like, yeah, it's a countryside. You're gonna get spiders. But yeah, that was the only time I thought I would see a ghost, and we didn't, did we? Just it was really interesting though. I would definitely recommend going. Definitely recommend going to Chiltern Castle. I've really sought it there. So getting back to the point, another theme of the Women in White legend, we're going to go to Brazil now. So the Brazilian legend, this woman in white is called Dame Branca, and it is reported to be a young woman who died in childbirth and is often mute, but occasionally this ghost will actually speak and tell their sad tale to those who see her. The origin is unclear, but some believe it actually stems from a really sinister real life history in Portugal and Brazil of fathers, husbands, and brothers murdering women in honor killings. Now, if you'll know about honor killings, it is just a terrible practice that sadly does still happen to this day, and it was quite prevalent in the past in Portugal and Brazil. And you don't need me to tell you, but it's where family members or husbands will murder the wife, daughter, sister because they want to stop them bringing shame on the family. It could be that they've married someone that the family doesn't agree with, or it could be that the husband believes that they've committed adultery. That's another quite sad, horrific one. There's a theme coming out, isn't there? Of violence towards women that is just so horrific. It must manifest into this energy behind the afterlife.
Yeah, I think it's just women dying in horrific
Mhm.
ways. Just stains the past, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Stains the past, but creates maybe an energy that they can't move on from. And because they had no power against this horrific thing that was happened to them, maybe that's where the ghost comes into play. And moving on to Japan, this one terrifies me. I don't know if it's just my generation. I grew up with horror films like The Ring, The Grudge, but there's something about Japanese horror that just really like it's the one thing that really gets me, to be honest. And women in white feature in lots of Japanese legends. In the like I've just said, they have made their way into pop culture, like The Ring, The Grudge. However, these spirits are actually vengeful, and they do seek revenge for the violent way that they died. It's just popped into my head. There's another film as well, and I can't think what it's called. It might be some Shutter, but I think I might be making this up. It's got, I can't think of his name, the guy out of Big Little Lies in the husband, but it's about this woman who like she's on his back.
Oh
You
yeah,
remember that
she sits
film?
on his back.
She's like
Yeah,
a deceased Japanese woman. It's her spirit, and she sits on his back, and he's got backache, and he's like, "What's going on?" And then when the pictures are developed, you can see the spirit just clutching around. Oh, it's just
spoiler alert.
well, it's years old, but God, that really really freaked me out. And that maybe that's what it is. It's the fact that they are going to hurt you. They're not just repeating some sad loop that and they don't acknowledge you at all. They can see you. They're going to hurt you. They're going to get revenge. And these tend to be long-haired spirits that can cause harm to those who see them. This bit I quite like. It's believed to be because in Japanese culture, the reason that they're wearing white, sorry, is because people are buried in white kimonos traditionally, so ghosts appear how they died, and that makes more sense to me because a lot of these women in white, I keep thinking, well, like you just said about the tracksuits and jeans, why are they wearing white all the time? That actually
At
makes
least it gives a
sense.
bit of reasoning
It does,
behind it,
doesn't
makes
it?
it a little bit more believable.
And yeah, that's exactly what it is. It makes it believable because that's what they were wearing. And I could be wrong here, but a lot of the films that I've seen, this could just be, artistic license. They're not pristine. On the ring, Samara, hers is, she's been in a well, so the white is completely grey. It's got mud and everything. It's
Hmm.
more believable than these pristine wedding gowns. But yeah, these are terrifying, aren't they?
Yeah, Japanese do a lot right, and horror is definitely one
They
of the
really
things.
do. We love a good horror film, and I think it's not. The Ring and The Grudge, they're all some of the best horror films, in my opinion, anyway. In Malta, so Malta's a bit different. It's more similar to the UK type of legend. And there's a place called Vidala of Adela Palace, and it's in the middle of a forest in Malta. And apparently, according to local legend, a young woman was forced to marry someone that she didn't love by her father because he was of better social standing than the person she actually did love. So sadly, the night before the ceremony, she jumped from a balcony in a wedding dress. I don't know why she was wearing the wedding dress the night before, or it could be the morning before, sorry, of the wedding that she jumped. But she appears late at night in the palace grounds in the forest, mourning her lost love. So that's quite similar to the ones we've covered before, where it's a really rich woman, she's been forced to marry someone, she's just repeating a sad loop, isn't it? It's not so much that she's out to get anyone.
Hmm.
But this gives me major Miss Havisham vibes. Miss Havisham from Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, one of my all-time favourite fictional characters. So if you know Miss Havisham, she was jilted at a wedding day and she just spent the rest of her life sitting in this decaying wedding dress with the cake gathering dust, getting mouldy and the dead flowers around her. It's just the most gothic thing ever. But it kind of reminds us I'm segueing here a bit. It kind of reminds me a little bit of our wedding. In a,
I don't know how.
yeah, no, in terms of not of our wedding, but I mean, I'll probably hear my family and friends rolling their eyes if they're listening. We were cancelled quite a lot of times by COVID were with our wedding. And don't get me wrong, God, so many worse things happened during COVID, but it was really sad and stressful for us. We were meant to get married in Cyprus and it got cancelled once, got cancelled twice. And eventually we did get married in a beautiful place in the UK and it was lovely. We had all of our family and friends. But I just mean I don't mean the actual vibe of Miss Havisham. I just think if you had jilted me on that wedding day, I think I was already a bag of nerves and I was waiting for something to go wrong after all this cancellation. I would still be sitting in the loft now with all the my little decorations from Etsy sitting around us. Just I would be, wouldn't I? Not that
100%.
I'd fit in that dress now, but I'd just be I'd have it draped across us some way. And then another one that I came across and I was doing some research really interesting is the Netherlands. Do you know anything about the legends of the white woman in the
Can't
Netherlands?
say that I do.
Well, you're going to know. They apparently are white maidens more than women in white. And this is really interesting because they can actually be, as well as malevolent, they can be benevolent,
Benevolent.
benevolent, benevolent. Yeah, sometimes I need to speak nice and slowly. Benevolent. And they can actually help women in childbirth, or they can be evil spirits who abduct and switch newborn babies. So, according to legend, the word wit, which is where the word white comes from, is white, but it is close to the word wid, W-I-D, which means wise. So, there's some people who say that it's been mistranslated. It's actually not women in white. So, this legend is a wise woman, and we'll all know wise women in the past were healers. They had the power in their community of people coming to them when they were ill. And the good thing with that is, if you cured someone, you kind of are like the local hero. You hold a lot of power. But as soon as your healing doesn't work, you very quickly turn into the town witch. And that is where some horrific crimes against women were committed, women and girls and men, actually, who are, persecuted for being witches. So it's interesting that the woman in white could be a kind, positive person. But again, it's someone who's been wronged, violent, they're out to get revenge. There's a common theme coming through, isn't there, of
Yeah,
this?
lots of violence.
Yeah, lots of violence. Um, I don't know why I'm laughing at that, but yeah, the Philippines. This one is probably one of the closest to supernatural. So getting back to the story that Sam and Dean come across. In the Philippines, apparently, if a spirit, tends to be a woman or a girl, has died in a car accident, they will haunt the stretch of road where they died. And they ask for a lift from, it tend to be taxi drivers who often are men alone in the car who are doing the graveyard shift. They'll be very quiet, meek, beautiful. They'll sit in the back seat. And then the driver will just have a little glance in the mirror and they'll see this horrific image of, it could be a decaying woman, it could be a woman covered in blood, a skeletal face, and they'll run away from the car, which is very similar, isn't it, to the supernatural story.
Yeah, completely fair enough. If you were to look into the back seat and see nothing but blood and
Hmm.
skeletal features, I think the first thing I'd do is tuck and roll.
I can just imagine you just you wouldn't even stop the car,
No,
just
no,
be.
no. Aim it for a tree and roll out.
Do you know what makes me laugh though about this is that I'm such a, I don't want to say bad driver. I don't out myself because I am a safe driver. I'm just not a confident driver.
Terrible driver.
But if I was to have someone in the back seat, I would be so conscious of driving on this that she would be in the back trying to get me attention with her ghostly face, like, and I just wouldn't notice, and she'd probably just give up and float out the window. Yeah, so yeah, that is quite close, that one, isn't it? And I think it reminds me a little bit of I'm getting off tangent, really off tangent now, but Kathy from Wuthering Heights, Emily Bronte, where she's this this goes to she's died tragically again in childbirth complications. It reminds me of the Kate Bush song, the video. So that's just a little bit of pop culture. We actually did go to Heathcliff's cottage, didn't we, a couple of years ago?
Or did he dragged us across the marshes?
Across the moors. Yeah, we couldn't get abroad, and we went to Haworth, which is an absolutely beautiful place in the UK, and we did the trek up to, can't remember the name of the, oh, what's it called? There's a waterfall, but then anyway, Heathcliff's cottage, which is rumored to be the inspiration behind his where he lived in Wuthering Heights. It's a long walk, isn't it?
A long walk
You
with like
didn't
five bricks at the end.
you did you didn't know much about Wuthering Heights, and I think, or the place, and I think you generally thought there's going to be some coffee shop, there'll be a Starbucks up there, there'll be Heathcliff people walking around in costume, and it was just the ruins. But I was in complete geek mode. I was just surrounded by other fans. So anyway, we're going to come on to some stories now of women in white ghosts who have appeared in different stories and legends. So the story, one of the first ones we're going to look at is from San Francisco, and it's a place called California Street in San Francisco. And apparently, there's a ghost there who is seen walking through walls and on the roofs of hotels, and they appear to passers-by at night, and they seem to be mourning something. They're not, they're not vengeful. They're just really sad. That's terrifying, though. The thought of seeing something walking across a roof.
Yeah, it's not something that I'd like to see.
It just reminds me of Assassin's Creed when you used to play that, and the little guy jumps across.
Maybe a bit creepier than Assassin's
Yeah, it
Creed.
would be probably a
So
little bit creepier. So anyway, this legend is apparently a ghost of a lady called Flora Summerton. She was 18 in 1876 and she was a celebrated beauty and heiress, sorry. Her parents had arranged for her to be betrothed to a wealthy older man to kind of cement their status in society. Obviously, Flora was not happy with this union. She wasn't in love with the man. He was older. So on the night of her coming out ball, which is a debutante tradition, um, coming out balls are interesting, aren't they? Do you know what they are?
no, do tell.
Lesson time. No, just it just reminds me a little bit of Downton Abbey, that kind of or Little Women, whether they're in these women who tended to be 17 upwards, the coming out ball would be when they were ready to be presented to society. So they'd wear the finest gowns and it would be a case of like a really posh cattle market. Here's my daughter, she's of marrying age, please take her. And it was a really stressful time actually because some of the women didn't get chosen and all that. But she wanted to marry someone else, presumably, or just no one at all. And this guy she's been forced to marry. So she runs away on the night of a coming out ball. She flees in this beautiful gown. Her parents offer $250,000 for her return. They plaster a face all over the newspapers, and you can imagine how much money that is nowadays. But there was no avail. Interesting though, because apparently a few years later, people started seeing Flora's ghost, and she's still seen nowadays, fleeing down the street, that kind of mad dash. But 50 years later, in Montana, the body of a woman showed up in a hotel, and in the cupboard there was the dress that Flora had run away with, and there was clippings from the newspaper story that were on the wall. She was called Mrs. Butler, but theories started to spring up that she was Flora. Now, the only thing that doesn't make sense with this story,
Or was that
there's a big,
people seen her die, seen her ghost when she was younger, but she apparently didn't
yeah,
die. What, until she was an old woman?
yeah. Now you're meant to be the more, you said you did say at the start of this that you're more minded. So is it potentially not that the energy was so catastrophic that it wasn't a ghost? It was one of these glitches in the timeline where she was, oh, am I just
I
no
think you're grasping at
grasping
straws.
at
Yeah,
straws there?
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm the more open-minded one, but come on now.
yeah, and I mean, if the ghost didn't appear till after Mrs. Butler died, then I would say, well, maybe she's just her ghost is when she was a young girl. But the fact that the ghost showed up before this woman was found,
Hmm.
but this woman might not have been her. She
Might not
could
have
have,
been. She could have just stole the dress.
or she could have looked. She could have taken her in when she was a young girl, and
Yeah,
protected her. Maybe she was still alive at that point. We don't really know with that one, but it hasn't sold me that one.
no, not at all.
This sounds like a local legend to the area. So, well, that brings us on to La Llorona. Now, that is one of the most well-known women in white stories, isn't it?
Hmm.
And I think that is aside from the Philippines legend, it's the closest to supernatural,
Yeah,
would you
definitely,
say?
definitely.
So, do you know much about La Llorona?
Just from the film.
Just from what, I haven't seen the film, which maybe I should have watched before this,
Yeah, you
but,
definitely should have. Yeah,
well,
it
yeah,
was
but
all right actually.
was it good?
I think so.
I don't know why. Maybe I'll put it on my list. But it's a legend. La Llorona means weeping woman, and in Hispanic cultures, the tale it does vary from who you hear it from. It could be one of the tales. Sorry, is a beautiful woman called Maria. She actually drowned her own children in order to be with the man she loved. He then turned her down, so she drowns herself in a lake in Mexico City. Other people, which is the more common story, say that she found out that her husband was being unfaithful. So, in this fit of temporary insanity, she kills her children. She snaps out of it, realizes what she's done, and she kills herself, which is very similar to Supernatural, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah, and apparently she's not permitted to get into heaven. So when she gets to the gates of heaven, she is asked about her kids, and because she can't answer the question, she's forced to wander out for all of eternity to search for a murdered offspring. So apparently she kidnaps children who look like hers, or children who are misbehaving, and you are told to not what's the word? Not to disrespect your parents. Don't go near lakes at night, and don't go out at night. Which, what do you make of that, first of all?
I don't know. To be fair, this one's pretty closely to an episode of Grimm actually, where kids are getting taken from near a lake, and it ends up being a monster type thing that's doing it.
Yeah, do you not think, though, this could be like just one of those stories that the parents tell them to keep the kids in line?
Yeah, more than likely.
Yeah, I mean, don't disrespect your parents.
Don't disrespect parents. Do as you're told.
Don't go out at night. Don't hang around water. It's all the big things that you tell your kids not to do. But saying that, a lot of people, especially in Hispanic cultures and it's not even just Hispanic cultures. Clinton, we've seen La Llorona. There's some real life accounts, that they have that they actually come across this woman. But I don't know. Is that more believable than that?
Real life accounts don't really offer massive evidence, do they? I
Oh,
mean, and
Mr. Open-minded.
I'm starting to maybe I'm the one that's a bit more
Yeah.
pessimistic about
Yeah,
it.
I think you've lied to the
Yeah, I think I
audience.
have.
Um,
You're clearly the more optimistic one than me.
I think I'm hoping anyway that by doing all this research and talking about it, and hopefully, if you would like to send us any stories of your own in, I'm hoping to actually become more open-minded, like you apparently are. Um, so the last story, well, the second last story is this one that I did come across, which I'm not gonna set it up too much, but for me, this is the most believable that I've come across so far. So apparently, this one's called the White Lady of Oystermouth. Now I'm really kind of scared to say that word Oystermouth because is it like Plymouth? Because I used to say Plymouth in the UK was Plymouth. So is it Oystermouth?
Well, I mean, from how
Don't
it's
know.
spelled, it surely is
Oyster
oyster
Mouth,
mouth.
but it could be Oystermouth. It's in Swansea. So please let us know how ridiculous I am pronouncing things. But apparently, this family were having a picnic in Swansea Bay on the grounds of Oystermouth Castle, and it's apparently a beautiful spot for picnics. I haven't been there myself, but while the parents were resting, the two young children just went off to have a little play, and they found a tree. And they came back to the parents, they were quite distressed, and they were saying, Mum, Dad, there's a lady crying behind the tree. She looks really upset. So the dad went with them. He was a bit, apprehensive, bit curious. He went to the tree and he did actually see, which I like about this story, because this could happen and the woman's gone by the time he gets there. There was a woman dressed in a long white robe with a cord tied around her waist, and she was sobbing her heart out. But it was weird because apparently the dad says they couldn't hear a sound when she was crying. So he went up to the lady and she just had her back turned to him. But when she turned around, you could see that the top part of her dress was ripped to shreds and her back was raw and bleeding from laceration. So she'd been flogged, which doesn't happen nowadays in civil society, as a punishment. So he stood for a moment, decided what to do. He took the children back to his wife, and then he came back to see if he could help the woman because he thought maybe she'd been a victim of an attack or something like that. But she'd gone, completely gone. What do we think?
I mean, for it to be more believable, I don't understand why he didn't just sort of tap her on the shoulder straight away.
Would you?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Would you?
If
I
it,
mean, she's got loads of cuts on her back, so you're going to tap her on the shoulder.
I mean, if it
That's
was the middle of the
just rub
day,
salt in the
it was
wound.
the middle of the day, mate. Well, I mean, maybe not tap her on the back then, but I mean, try and talk to her. Not walk away and try and
Yeah,
go and get
can
your
we?
wife.
Yeah, I don't know. See, I believe this one because if they'd come over, I mean, apparently children and animals are more susceptible to seeing these things. So I still even believe it kind of if the dad had got there and there'd been no one there.
Mhm.
But the fact that the dad goes over and he sees this woman and she's very much there, then he takes the kids back just to get them out of the way, comes back, she's gone. I mean, could it just have been if it was just woman in white standing crying, I would put the dad's saying, and by all accounts, he's quite a respectable, not someone who makes something up. She's crying her eyes out, she has got flog marks all over her back. Makes it believable for me.
It
That one
does
freaked
make it
me
a
out
little bit
more than the
more.
other ones. And another story coming from the same place was that there was a local man taking his dog for a walk near the castle. He lost the dog. He didn't know where he'd gone. So when he whistled, the dog didn't return, which was very unusual. Started to panic. He begins searching for the dog. And then he hears, after a little while, the dog whimpering. And he finds it behind a tree, which could be the same tree, and absolutely petrified with fear. Its eyes are fixed on part of the castle wall. So it's starting to get dark, but he's curious about what could have frightened the dog to that extent because it's not the type of dog that gets scared. So he goes towards the spot on the castle wall that the dog seems to be, fixated on, and he saw a white shape on the floor just in front of the wall. As he gets closer, the dog begins to howl, and the white shape, which he thought might be a piece of paper, it rises up from the ground, and it was a woman in white robe, and it appears as a figure. But before you can kind of figure out what's going on, she seems to melt into the castle wall. And when he reaches the place where she disappeared, he just saw that there was no way that she could have went through the window or that there's no little gap in the side. It and the way he puts it, and I've quoted this from the story, is that the earth just swallowed her up. And that's the same castle. Two different men who know nothing about each other. They've had a very similar experience of a woman in white.
Little to see if I ever went to that castle, I'd be taking salt with us.
Yeah, explain salt in case people don't know.
Well, obviously it's what Sam and Dean use for the vast majority of things to get rid of ghosts. Salt or iron. Obviously just chuck the salt at it. Grab the dog and run would be what my course of action would be.
That's true. So yeah, that those two are the most believable. I think they are really quite scary stories. But well, me anyway. What do you think? Do you think they're believable, more believable than the other ones I've read?
I think the second one was a little bit more believable than the
Why?
first one was. Daylight in it, middle of the day,
Mm,
goes over. Like, why did he walk away and go and try and get his wife rather than asking the woman if she was all right?
maybe
Whereas
it's
the second one
yeah.
was because the dog was howling
Well,
out
come
and
on. I
stuff.
mean, we've got a daughter now. I can understand that logic of seeing a woman in distress.
A
As
shout from a
much as
shout from a distance,
as
be
much as you
alright.
want to help her, she could be involved in something dangerous. You get the kids out of the way first, then you go back and help her.
Stand at, I say, stand at a distance. You alright over there? You alright? You turn around? Everything okay?
Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll agree to disagree on that one. I thought those were definitely more believable than our Flora from San Francisco anyway.
Oh
Can
yeah,
we agree on that one?
100%. Yeah.
Okay, so apparently, really quickly before we go on to our last story, is apparently this woman in white at the castle is Lady Elena de Brosse, who was the eldest daughter of William de Brosse in 1298. She lived at Swansea Castle, and she also she married someone called John de Mowbray. He would go on to participate in the Barons' Revolt against King Edward II of England. So because he got involved with this revolt, her husband was executed. So she, Alina, she fled to Devon. She was discovered and she ended up being imprisoned in the notorious Tower of London. But when she got released, she got control of her land back again. She did marry someone else, and she lived quite a happy life. She got control of her castle back. There was no violence involved apart from being imprisoned early in her life. So that doesn't really go with the common thread, does it?
No,
you
not at all.
know.
No.
But it could be that, she was treated so badly and she fought so hard for her castle that maybe she was flogged during this time. And when she's a ghost, she's so protective of keeping her land, she reverts back to that.
Yeah, maybe it's a ghost trying to keep men away from a land.
Yeah, yeah, oh, that's interesting because it's both men who find,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
but I mean, she does, it's children and a dog who initially find it, but it is men who just try to keep them away, maybe
Yeah.
warn them. So that brings us on to our last story. This one's a bit different. This is a story that my mum used to tell me when I was younger. Um, so it's one of my favourite ones. I'm gonna read it out, and that's gonna round up the show quite nicely, I think. And we're gonna ultimately discuss what we think about the woman in white legend altogether, and does this story, the final story, make you believe? So this is the story of the mistletoe bride. Picture the scene. It is a midwinter night in the early 1800s. Snow falls from the sky and settles on the windowsill of a grand country estate. It is the evening after the wedding of a glamorous young couple from high society, and the wedding has seen hundreds of guests toasting to the good health of the beautiful young man and woman. It is the early hours, and most guests have long ago set off for home or they've headed upstairs for the warmth of their beds after a long day of celebrating. Only 30 or so guests, including the bride and groom, are still awake in the decadent drawing room, and they've gathered around a roaring fire. An opulent Christmas tree stands in the corner of the room, and the entire house is decorated with ivy garlands and nativity scenes. The guests are merry from one too many sherries, and they've exhausted a number of parlour games. Suddenly, the bride, a stunning 18-year-old woman, suggests that they play a game of hide and seek. The guests agree, and whilst one counts to 100, the guests scatter to find the best hiding spot in the house. Giddy with excitement, the bride hurries up the twirling staircase, careful not to trip over the trail of her elaborate tulle wedding dress. She dares to venture to the farthest part of the sprawling house, and she sneaks into a small room that's been turned into a space for gathering clutter over the years. The dust covering everything in sight shows how rarely this room is visited. Giggling to herself, she spots a large, ancient leather trunk, once used for shipping belongings across transatlantic sea journeys, but hasn't been opened in decades. Struggling to lift the lid, she eventually manages and climbs inside. The space is large, but she still has to lie curled up in her dress to fit. She waits for what feels like hours. Surely she must have won the game by now. Frustrated that no one has found her, but also feeling quite victorious, she decides to rejoin her family and friends. After all, it is her wedding night, and she's eager to be reunited with her beloved husband. As she pushes the trunk lid, it refuses to budge. Panicking now, she pushes with all of her might, but still the lid refuses to move. She screams and she screams. Meanwhile, the other partygoers have been searching for the bride for an hour. They've checked every part of the house, but to no avail. Panic has set in, and the hours slip away. Eventually, police detectives are called in, and a sweep of the house takes place. The young bride is never found, and the years go by. The mystery of the mistletoe bride echoes through high society, and some wonder if she had a secret lover who she absconded with into the night. The devastated groom has since remarried, and has children of his own now. The family have left the grand estate, and 20 years later, new residents move in. They renovate the home and builders swarm through every room of the house. A large, ancient looking trunk is found in a long forgotten room of the house. The new owners excitedly gather round as a builder wrenches it open. They hope for treasure and jewels. Instead, horrifyingly, they find the skeletal remains of a woman in a dusty, yellowing, but still beautiful tulle wedding dress. The lid of the trunk shows signs of bloody scratches, and what remains of a face bears a horrifying, contorted grimace. The longest game of hide and seek is finally over, and the winner has been found. That is a horrific story, isn't it?
Well, it's a horrible way to go.
It's just one. It's this probably explains a lot about me, but that actually was told to me as a bedtime story when I was young. Good night. It was. Oh, I might be doing my mum just injustice here. It was either told to me as a bedtime story, or it was in one of these books. 'Cause my mum had loads of books. I was really lucky. There was lots of, books lying around the house, and there was this book of ghost stories that I was obsessed with, and I was absolutely obsessed with this story.
I hope it wasn't your mum that told you it.
But either way, we do love our horror stories. It really upset me actually more than terrified, and I think it's one
Just
of
makes
them.
me question really how bad these people were at hide and seek. I don't understand how they could have given up. Like how many rooms in the house was there, and how many trunks could there have been? Surely there would have been looking in cupboards and other various places. A giant ancient trunk just sat in the middle of the room. They're like, nah,
Can't be that.
let's not check in there. Why would we check in there? Like to the point where they can't even hear us screaming.
That's true.
They got the police in as well, and the police couldn't even find her.
Excellent detective work.
Oh yeah,
I could understand this because I'm a teacher. I'm currently off for maternity leave. And when kids play hide and seek, you're meant to go and hide behind the teacher's legs or a bench. The kid who goes and finds a really good spot, well, the rest of them have moved on. They're playing hopscotch when you're sat up a tree.
which is she's the new wife. I'm pretty sure they're not going to move on. And yeah, plus the adults. So
Yeah,
just going to give
true.
up and move on. Like it's our wedding day. Surely they would be like, well, we've got to find her.
Maybe she's been an absolute bridezilla. They're just like, you know what? We'll just let her cool off for 20 years.
20 years. We'll give it 20 years, and
I'll
we'll
do it.
we'll give it a proper look then.
Maybe I'm making light of this story because this isn't a real story. It's an urban legend, so we can't make fun of it. Um, it's traced back to an Italian poem from the 1800s called Geneva by Samuel Rogers. But what happened is it made its way into English culture and it became one of these urban legends that think of Downton Abbey and these big grand houses that have these big parties, and it was oh such and such as brother's cousin. It was their daughter. This happened to, and everyone seemed to have a different. It changed from being house to house, so it's not real. I just really want to put that story in because I thought it was a really spooky, scary way to end it.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, that's my favourite one actually. So to sum everything up, we've started looking at Supernatural, the woman in white. We've talked about the legend coming from loads of different cultures, and we've had some real life stories. Out of all of those stories that you've heard today, have I managed to convince you that a woman in white legend is real?
Probably not. No,
No.
no. I'm supposed to be the open-minded one.
No, I think, for me, I think it's more of a metaphor for the violence committed against women, and it can be a cautionary tale as well, not to treat women badly. And that's what I think it is. It's more of it's an urban legend, it's a story, but never say never say never on that one. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening to the very first episode of Ghost Creatures and Scares Oh My.
Please make sure to leave us a review and let us know what you thought of today's episode. Feedback will really help us out, and we really want to know your thoughts to help us to hone our podcast.
Yeah, so we're brand new to this. We are in the middle of trying to set up a Facebook and Instagram page, but at the moment we haven't managed to do that. Hopefully by the time the show goes out, we might have. But if you want to get in touch with us to leave us a review or a message, feedback, a story of your own, you can email us at ghostcreaturesandscares@gmail.com. So no spaces in between that. Ghostcreaturesandscares@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. We will be back next week. We're going to be looking at the absolutely petrifying legend of the Wendigo from episode 2 of Supernatural season 1. So have a great week and we'll see you next time.
Have a great week.